I, I have to start with a confession. Joel, when you did your platform SSO presentation and asked who had done it before, I left my arm up because I wasn't paying attention. And usually when these questions come, I put my arm up. So I am sorry. My name is Armin Briegel. You hopefully know my website, Scripting OS 10. I also got caught by the blessing or curse, depending on how you see it. And I've been working with Jamf for the last 2 years. There will be a lot of references to other things, and you don't have, well, you can take notes, but you don't have to remember the links. I don't even put links on the slide because I put them on my website. This is the website, should be up and running, hopefully. And all the links to the things I talk about will be there. I'll repeat this link at the end as well. I want to start with a flashback to 2019. The last time we were here, the last time I stood on stage here, I was talking about Z Shell. It was fun times. And it's been 4 years since then, and I just wanted to get us back into that mindset. What were we doing then? What was the things that were interesting for MacAdmins in 2019? The iPad Pro had the A12X or A12Z chip, and the benchmarks for these chips were the first ones where Apple's own silicon beat the Intel chips in the MacBook Pros. Not the MacBook Air, not the 12-inch MacBook, but the MacBook Pros. And that set the entire rumor mill about Apple is going to move to their own chips, to ARM chips in MacBooks. We know how that worked out. The iPhone looked like, wait, this is the current iPhone? This is the iPhones look just the same. They have improved since then, but they look just the same. The current macOS, the last time we met here, was macOS Mojave. And the main new feature in macOS Mojave was dark mode. It's only been 4 years, kind of amazing. We also got, and this seemed a bit irrelevant then, but it's turning out to be quite important. We got these 4 apps, which in themselves, not too thrilling, but they were built with an then yet unnamed framework that allowed it to port iOS apps more easily to macOS. I'll talk a bit more about that later. Mojave would warn when you tried to launch a 32-bit process. Seems so long ago. It introduced privacy preferences policy control. We all know how that worked out. It was succeeded a few weeks after we met here by macOS Catalina 10.15, which we all remember quite well. C# was the default shell. It introduced system extensions as a replacement for kernel extensions. It was the first macOS to have a dedicated system volume split out from the data volume. It introduced notarization. We got Swift UI for the first time. The framework to port iOS apps was called Mac Catalyst, and more apps by Apple and then third-party vendors were ported, among them music, podcasts, and TV, which replaced iTunes after nearly 2 decades. macOS Catalina, 2019. That's where we were, just 4 years ago. Seems like forever. Today, I want to give an overview of the state of MacAdmin Tools, and also the state of the community and everything. Of course, I will talk about Apple, I will talk about commercial tools, and I will talk about the community. And I will talk, or at least try to, I only have 50 minutes. I will try to talk about how these overlap and interact and work together and marketing synergize. First, Apple. Our friends from Apple were here earlier this week, and they did great presentations. But as much as I like them, they have a bias. I don't know if you noticed. I too have a bias, but I hope it's different enough that this will be interesting and illuminating. macOS Sonoma, which came out last week, is the 20th incarnation of the operating system formerly known as macOS 10, which is quite impressive, actually. It's been there for 22 years, not counting the public beta and Rhapsody and Next Step and everything that came before. And you can talk about how this falls into different segments or eras. You can slice it by the version number, or who was the CEO, what the branding name was, what the default shell was. That's interesting for me. Yeah, remember we used to distribute these with optical drives and had to get them? Seems ages ago. It actually was ages ago. But do you remember that we paid for the upgrades? Which platform did it run on? The Apple Silicon transition is going on for longer than the Intel transition took. I found that actually quite interesting. Hadn't considered that. The server app existed for longer than macOS Server as a standalone operating system did. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, and which one gets updates and which one doesn't, kind of, sort of. So this is, of course, just the history of macOS and macOS 10, but this fits into a larger history of all the operating systems in the Apple ecosystem and the ones that kind of influenced macOS, like Next Step and BSD and FreeBSD, and of course the classic macOS and the Apple II and Newton and Lisa and everything that came before. And then macOS is the turning point because it had a lot of offspring itself. And of course, most notably, iOS came out of macOS, and out of that came all the other platforms up to and including visionOS, which is currently in beta and will get sometime next year. And this is pretty amazing. And we are here, and this is the Mac sysadmin. We call ourselves MacAdmin. We focus on this tiny sliver here. And it's only one piece of the entire picture. And we sometimes feel neglected and frustrated and say Apple isn't focusing enough on this. But Apple doesn't, I believe, Apple doesn't treat these as individual platforms. They see this is one thing, the entire ecosystem. And it's held together by iCloud and the online services. And as important as macOS is, and macOS has a very distinctive role in this ecosystem, I think we also have to keep that perspective. What's cool is this year, we can manage right now all of the platforms that are available because watchOS 10 introduces management. We don't know about the visionOS. Will we be able to manage it? But the way Apple is showing how you can use it in work environments, use it together with your Mac, I would be very surprised if we didn't get that. Maybe not in the first release, but I'm quite confident going forward that we will also be able to manage that. Apple likes bento boxes. I like them too. I thought I'd make one. Everything starts at enrollment. Apple showed this slide. I think it's very important. A lot has changed in the last 4 years. Erase all content and settings, right? Best feature Apple ever added for us admins. I use it every day. I will gripe a lot about Apple Next, but we also have to applaud them when they get it right. This is technically not enrollment, but it helps us so much during enrollment testing. And also, they introduced this feature, and it came with an MDM command, and it came with an MDM restriction, so we could control it. Very well done. We can enforce enrollment now, starting in Ventura, And in Sonoma, this changes. In Sonoma, if a device is assigned in ABM but not enrolled and it connects to the internet, this is a screen blocking dialog that you will get, or the user will get, and say, you need to enroll. It will block everything. It's actually pretty cool. But if you haven't tested this setup yet, you need to check it, because there may be stray devices with this setup that you don't expect, and this dialog will pop up to the user and block their work. It's pretty cool. It does what it's intended to, but it might be disrupted. I also think we might be able to use this for some really interesting workflows. We can add devices, Macs, after the fact to Apple Business Manager with a very neat tool called Apple Configurator for iPhone. I just love this animation. I had to borrow it. So this is the automated device enrollment. Should be our preferred choice. That's nice. I had a few slides talking about account-driven user enrollment. I was able to throw them out because Emily did such a great presentation on how that works. And I do want to remind everybody, this is not just theory. We at Jamf use account-driven user enrollment for all our iPhones, and it works really well. The key thing here is it separates the user apps and data from the work apps and data. The user keeps control and ownership of the device. And when the user wants to take the device out of management, or we decide we don't want to manage that particular device anymore, the work partition gets destroyed and everything is fine. Watch the recording for Emily's presentation about the rest. User-initiated enrollment, the classic one where you download a profile and enroll using the profile, has gotten a sibling, account-driven device enrollment. The Apple people talked about that. You can see about that in the WWDC sessions. Apple didn't say they're deprecating or killing the traditional user-initiated enrollment, but I think its days are numbered, which means we will need managed Apple IDs. Up until this point, we could kind of ignore managed Apple IDs or have them on the side and not really needed to use them. And quite frankly, they weren't that useful because they had many limitations. Now we can federate with more identity providers. The managed Apple ID themselves are getting more features. We need to get prepared. If you haven't claimed your domains until yet, if you haven't started the process to get your managed Apple ID set up, you should start that now. Again, Emily's session. But this is the reminder. We really need to get that going with the enrollment options, and I believe going forward there will be more and more options that will require a managed Apple ID. Platform SSO, or SSO. We saw that platform SSO in Joel's session. Maybe not quite there yet. But the SSO option, where we get SSO tokens for the user, and they don't have to authenticate all the time, because the SSO extension and the app from the identity provider insert themselves, and they get tokens, and they can use multi-factor authentication or biometrics. Really great. Wonderful thing that was added, and it works really well. The platform SSO part, and also some of the new SSO features, Okta and Microsoft have them both in various levels of preview, and hopefully before the end of the year we can actually start implementing them. If you have a provider that doesn't support this yet, you should really put pressure on them. I'm also going to talk about some tools that are relevant for us directly, not just tools for management, but everyday tools. I'll interlude them. One thing that I wanted to point out, which I used building these slides, is Keynote, amazing tool, and SF symbols. I've seen many people already use SF symbols in Keynote. It's great if you need an icon. There's a new feature in SF Symbols 5 where you can export the symbol as an SVG, a scalable vector graphic. And when I paste that into Keynote, I can break that apart into its components and color and change them each individually, and you can make really nice icons. Really great if you want to do special effects. I got this tip from my coworker Misha. So, and I've been using it. You will recognize those icons. You should start using it too. Service configurations. Again, something the Apple people talked about. We can push down a zip with Unix configuration files, basically, for command line-based tools. We can't yet really play around with that. I don't think any of the MDMs really support it yet, but it will come soon. I'm really looking forward to this. Why I wanted to highlight this, the Unix command line and the Unix tools that we configure with this, they are distinctly macOS. Something like this does not exist on iOS, iPadOS, and all the other platforms. So we get frustrated that macOS is somewhere on the side, but somebody in Cupertino thinks that macOS is important and this part of macOS is important. Because macOS is Unix. To this day, macOS Sonoma is still a certified Unix. I probably should have done this. I'm wearing Fleetsmith socks today. I got them 4 years ago when Fleetsmith was one of the sponsors. Totally unrelated, of course. Apple introduced Apple Business Essentials. They have their own MDM. Well, they had Profile Manager before, but they have a real MDM now. They say it's for small businesses. It's, I might be biased, very basic as an MDM. But it is very interesting. It has some exclusive services, like you can add additional iCloud storage to managed Apple IDs, which for business customers, the only way to do that. They can also add special AppleCare incidents to managed, or to the devices that are managed. So that's very interesting. We are looking at this from afar because it's only for the US until now. We have to stay outside. But we can look at what's happening there, and I hope eventually that might change. But the interesting thing here is there is this team within Apple that's building Apple Business Essentials, and they are now consuming their own framework. The MDM framework was until now something Apple built, and we as the management vendors, developers had to use, but Apple didn't use it themselves. Now they have to use it themselves, and I do think we're already seeing the benefits of that. Documentation. Apple has provided an amazing amount of new documentation over the past few years. Apple Platform Security and Apple Platform Deployment were mentioned in many of these sessions by people that came before me, and there are many more in this. And they are excellent pieces of documentation. You should reference those. You should use those and send them to coworkers or your security teams or your management and say, this is how things are supposed to work on the Apple platforms. They also added trainings, self-paced online trainings for device support and deployment and management. There's also one for Apple Business Essentials. The device support and deployment and management actually have certifications that you can pay for and do a proctored online test. This is really interesting and a great step forward. If you write documentation, and we all know we should write documentation, in the Apple device world, you will sometimes wonder whether Mac App Store is written with or without spaces, and what's the order for command keystrokes, and whether I can say the MacBook or the iPhone. And Apple has a book for free in the Apple Bookstore that is called the Apple Style Guide. And it's really helpful when you're writing these things and you know that you can say the MacBook, but you can't say the iPhone. Don't ask me why. Go and check that out. I think Eric gave me that advice several years ago, and I referenced that a lot. So the documentation story is great. They've done great things, but I have to point out there are still some glaring omissions and holes there. Something that's dear to my heart, just as an example, is packaging. We like to complain about vendors who build horrible installer packages. But quite frankly, there's no documentation from Apple that says, this is how you should write installer packages. There's a book by some guy online, but that's everything. I wish there were more things. Building configuration profiles, configuration profiles, same thing. Writing scripts for security, same thing. There's great resources online, but nothing from Apple. Apple has been pushing developers to use subscriptions and in-app purchases for their recurring revenue rather than updates, because the Mac App Store doesn't do that, or the iOS App Store. But we can't manage App Store subscriptions. We can't do a managed deployment of those. We can't do a managed deployment of in-app purchases. And there are some workarounds for that, but man, that would be really nice. Just a few examples. I don't want to turn this into a gripe fest because I'd be standing here all afternoon. Security and privacy, lots of additions there in the past few years. PPPC, security extensions have been really great. In Ventura, Apple added notifications about background items and changed a bit on how they work. That'll give us a glimpse of the future and how Apple thinks they're supposed to work in the future. We now have network relays and managed device attestation coming up with Sonoma. Lots of things with security. And we had great sessions this week where people talked about that, both the things that can go wrong, but also the things that work really, really well. Especially in Europe, we're all multilingual, most of us are. Dictionary is a great tool. It's built into macOS, it's also built into iOS and iPadOS. There's not a dedicated app for it there. I really like that. It also gives you etymology for words, and I love that. For example, the word disaster has been thrown around a lot this week. Bring your own disaster or not. It actually comes from the Italian dis astra, which means bad star, and comes from astrology. Something is born under a bad star and will never really amount to much, and always things are going wrong. Guess who studied astrophysics? Yeah, this is, of course, entirely unrelated. Moving on. I don't have to talk much about software update because Tom already did earlier this week. And if you're watching the recording, or if you're sitting here, go and watch that recording because that was really great. It has been challenging. There are open source tools, I'll talk about them later, that can help us with that. On top of that, Apple threw in rapid security responses last year with Ventura. And there is hope going forward that the DDM workflow will make these things better, but I guess we are all sitting there and waiting. I was interested, talking about rapid security responses, in whether they're replacing security updates or not. And see, when I prepared these slides, I was really expecting this week there'd be a security update for iOS 14, and then this morning I forgot to update it. So I don't know. We have 1 year of statistics. I don't know if rapid security responses are on top of the normal security updates or replacing security updates. Still unconclusive. But macOS 12 was a weird outlier here. Yeah, let's talk about the update cycle. The year for the MacAdmin starts at WWDC in June. Then we get the beta phase, 3 or 4 months, with the release of the operating system in the fall. And then this started with macOS 12. The minor updates actually added features. Features that were announced at the developers conference shipped later in minor updates. SharePlay is one example. And then 12.3, we got a negative update because they removed Python 2. Universal control was first a beta, then released in 12.4. The network extensions changed. This is not a big user-facing thing, but they changed in the 12.5 release. The .5 release is usually around developers conference, so that's when Ventura was introduced. The cycle starts over, we get the beta phase. And then more features. 13.1 added the freeform app and iCloud Advanced Data Protection, RSRs and security keys. 13.2, emojis, always important. Our users want to use those emojis later on, and they also changed management things with the Wi-Fi priority changing in 13.2 and beta enrollment in 13.4. these things can happen at any time during the year. We don't have a big release in the fall anymore, and then we can relax for a few months before the next WWDC. Updates can happen all the time. And now, of course, with Sonoma, the cycle is repeating, and Apple has already announced. They are very frank about this. There are features in Sonoma that will come with later minor updates. And these are the user-facing features, because that's what they talk about. I'm certain there will be management features. I've already said there are some features that aren't yet in Apple Business Manager and Apple School Manager that will come later throughout the year. So we have to be prepared. We have to test these. We have to be on the beta cycles all the time. I want to highlight these two apps. Freeform came out with Ventura. Journal was announced this year, should come with iOS 17 and macOS Sonoma. It doesn't even have an icon yet. These go in with all the other apps that come with the operating system. They are updated in lockstep with the operating system. They require the latest operating system, in this case Sonoma, but the same works for iOS. There is a different bunch of apps from Apple, and they come through the Mac App Store. Some of them we have to pay for. Some of them are free. And it took me a while to figure out, why does Apple put these apps in the App Store and other apps come with the operating system? All the apps in the App Store support the current and previous version of the operating systems. Some of them even go back more versions of the operating systems. And I thought, well, wouldn't that be nice? All the apps in the App Store also get updates outside of the normal cycle. They are not tied to macOS updates. They usually kind of coincide, but they don't have to. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice if Apple took a bunch of their apps and put them in the App Store, and they would break away from that? Why are Freeform and Journal not App Store apps? And I don't know the answer, and the Apple people wouldn't tell me if I asked them, but I'm like, maybe? Either way, we need to provide zero-day support for our users. And that means we have to continually test major and minor betas. You have to have test devices living on the betas. 17.1 and macOS Sonoma 14.1 are available on the second beta already. We don't know when it will be, but the .1 update is usually fairly quick. But that also means that if you have third-party software that is blocking you from this adoption, and we can defer for up to 90 days, but if you are continually pushing that or beyond that, and I will accept certain education deployments from this, but otherwise, if you are continually pushing those 90 days, you have to identify the blocking problems and fix them. And if it's a third-party vendor, you have to put pressure on them. Apple Suite for IT is the solution to get the betas. As people have said earlier, it also gets us into a different feedback channel. And we have seen over the last few years that this actually helps. It also gets you access to better release notes and some tools like Mac Evaluation Utility. So I'm not really finished with Apple. We will keep talking about Apple all the time, of course. But moving on to commercial tools. And MDM is essential. That was clear 4 years ago. That was clear 5 years ago. Imaging is dead. MDM is the essential piece of managing Macs and iOS devices. With Macs, we have the additional thing that the management system can install its own agent, which gives more information going back and forth, more options of doing things on the Mac. This is why the Mac is special. And I think that's very important. The great thing is that these days, we are spoiled for choice as MacAdmins. There have never been more choices for a management system. And that's exciting, because this kind of competition and choice is good for the ecosystem. There are some out there, I do want to say that kind of come from the MDM, and they implemented the MDM protocol for iOS, and then they looked at it and said, hey, look, MDM for macOS, nearly the same, let's implement that. And then we can check off Mac in our checklists, and you know they're going to spell it that way. But they're missing the agent part because they have no experience with macOS. They don't understand macOS as a platform. So that's something for your evaluation. Again, I'm biased, but maybe you don't want to go there. Another thing has changed, not just over the last few years, but this was hyper-accelerated by the pandemic, and that's how we structure our networks. In the before times, long before, we had a firewall around our trusted network, and everything was inside and happy and safe. And things that were outside were untrusted or in a zero-trust network, and they could use their username and password to get through the VPN to get access. And then, of course, smartphones became more and more popular, laptops became more and more popular, and more of these devices moved out into the untrusted networks, and some of the services moved out into the cloud and into the untrusted networks. And Graham talked about this, of course, with zero trust access. And not everybody can get to this point where the trusted network is pointless, but it's a future. For some, it's a reality, but if it isn't, it's a future you have to contend with. And then we have to think about how do we connect these things. And I will refer to Graham's great session for the details, but the solution is, of course, we need some zero trust, untrusted network access tool. And these tools, to be really efficient, should know about the state of the user and the state of the device, which means these tools have to work well together with your management and your security tools. And they should know the platform that they are built for. And this is the point where I really have to plug my employer and say, we have a suite of tools that do exactly this for the zero trust network access, and they work with the management tool and the security tool that we have. And I think this is a great solution. It's not the only one. Because security. Security has become much more important, and security tools have become much more prevalent on macOS, and there are more security tools than ever before that we can choose from. Again, I would say you probably want to choose one that really understands the Apple platforms, the Mac platform in this case, and not just does a Mac client as an afterthought, and then is surprised that there's yearly updates for macOS. There's another great thing in development and security, the macOS Security Compliance Project. It also has been mentioned before this week. It's mostly from some US MacAdmins have come together and assembled all of the different benchmarks and requirements for these various benchmarks and put them in an online repository with a Python-based tool that allows you to build your own benchmark. It's really great. You should check it out if you're not using it already. One thing I want to add here is our security team, some of my coworkers of Jamf, have put together a UI for this called Jamf Compliance Editor, and it has hooks. When you're using Jamf Pro, it can upload the scripts and the profiles that the compliance project generates, but you don't have to use it with Jamf. You can also use it as a Jamf standalone, so you should really check that out. They are already updated for Sonoma. So as soon as the benchmarks themselves update, they will update the project. So also check that you have the latest versions. I had these slides in before Andrew did his great talk. Just want to say that, but I love how they align with what he said. We should know by now that tightening restrictions does not increase security. The user will find a way to get around them. And if they have to pull out their iPhone and do whatever they do on the unprotected personal iPhone, that's what they're going to do. Our job is not to tighten the restrictions. Our job is to provide protection where it's necessary, provide guidance on what is the right thing to do, because how else would the users know? Make the things that the user wants to do and needs to do easy, in a secure way. And this is, of course, much harder than just tightening restrictions and throwing policies on the devices, but that is the effective way of increasing the security. So, kind of finished with commercial tools. I have one more thing here. Many of you know this, But I'm surprised that many people still don't know this. This was introduced in macOS Sierra. Might have been OS 10 Sierra, I forget. Shift Command dot in the Finder will hide and unhide hidden files. Use it all the time. You don't have to do some weird defaults command and kill Finder. Shift Command dot. Remember that. Get it into your muscle memory. I use it all the time. So this is my favorite part. Community and open source. And just to prefix this, I will only list a few things. The list could go on. And there will be tools that I don't mention today. There are some that I had to take out of the slides because I only have so much time, and there's some that I probably just missed and that you really like and think should be in this list, and you are probably right. I apologize in advance. There's only so much time for preparation and doing this. But I wanted to provide a bit of information. First of all, we got the MacAdmins Foundation. It is still mostly US-centric, but the effect is global, and we, even here in Europe, are very much profiting from that because they keep the MacAdmin Slack alive, which I think is just a great place for everybody. If you're not signed up, you really should. They also provide stipends for people who can't otherwise afford it to do the certifications online, and they have started to provide tickets for conferences. So I think that's a great thing. Wonderful work. They've also started working with open source developers from the community and provide their developer ID certificates to sign and notarize open source. It's not the MacAdmins Foundation? But it's...
We funded MacAdmins open source so they could establish an identity to provide sign-up. So we underwrote their efforts.
I missed a layer of abstraction there. Okay, so they funded an MacAdmins open source, which provides the ID. Got to get this right for the lawyers. I will talk about many of these projects. This is an important thing because signing and notarization is just getting so essential for certain types of tools. And it can be really hard for an open source project to get at those certificates. I mentioned earlier Python 2 was removed in 12.3. Many people apparently listened to me in my presentations in 2019 and earlier and were prepared. It was less of a shock than I had feared, but there were still several tools and third-party software that broke because of that. I did a presentation last year on macOS automation where I go into more detail about this, but don't use Python 3 that's with Xcode, which is what Apple recommends to do. Don't do that. Bring your own Python. The MacAdmins open source project has a Python installer that is very useful if you don't want to do that. And the warning going forward, Apple has said the Perl and Ruby runtimes will also be installed at some unknown future macOS. So if you have dependencies on these, get prepared. It will happen eventually, maybe in a minor update halfway through the year. Monkey and Auto Package, great open source projects that have been going on for way more than a decade, which is an amazing achievement. I also, personally, this is my personal opinion, I think everybody here has said the MacAdmins community is so special because we are so open and we share a lot. And I think that's true, but I really think that projects like Monkey and Auto Package, which have been going on for a very long time, have played a big part in shaping this culture. And yes, so for that, everybody who is involved in this, thank you. They have survived the Python removal because they moved to Python 3 and bundled their own runtime way before, and we're prepared for that. Just saying that. Talked about software update, Eric Gomez's Nudge, and a bit newer tool, Kevin White's Superman or Super. Really great solutions if the built-in macOS notification and update workflows don't work for you, check these out. Yes, it was promised that macOS Sonoma would fix everything, but that is yet to be seen. And also, when you're upgrading macOS, you are by default working on older versions of macOS, so you can't use those nice Sonoma features. So you probably want to check out one of these tools. Graham Pugh's erase install script, poorly named because it can be used for non-destructive upgrades and updates, as well as erase install workflows. Goes a different approach. It always downloads the full installer, makes it a bit slower and more unwieldy, but more useful, especially with really old versions of macOS. And when you're updating and upgrading, you might be working with some really old in some deployments. Check out erase install. The workflow might work better for you. Søren yesterday talked about Installamator, so I really don't have to. I just have to say I am overwhelmed by the response from what started out as a pandemic project, lockdown project at my previous employer. We are now at more than 100 contributors and more than 600 applications that Installamator can install and update. I'm blown away. I'm the bottleneck right now. It would be more than 600, but I'm way behind on the backlog. So most of these were shell scripts and Python tools, and there's nothing wrong with that. Wonderful tools. Bash is still in macOS, even though the Bash 3.2 binary is 16-year-old this year, which means it can drink beer in Germany and drive cars in the US. There's also something, and if you've been following me, I am very fond of this, and I think it's a very important tool, and then you can build native apps, and when you build native apps, you will probably choose Swift. There are other options. And 4 years ago, Swift got Swift UI, and there's a lot of discussion in the developer world on whether Swift UI is really up to it, or whether you should use AppKit and Cocoa because it's so much better and richer. But for the kind of interfaces that we as MacAdmins want to build and that we as MacAdmins need, trust me, Swift UI is totally up to it. And it lowers the level of entry a lot. Swift UI is a lot easier to get into than UIKit or AppKit, at least in my opinion. And I've done a few things now. There are more advantages to writing native apps, and I've scratched on that before. If you want to assign PPPC entitlements or exemptions, you kind of sort of might be able to do that with a script, but it's really finicky and difficult and might break when you look at it the wrong way. If you have an app bundle, it's much more resilient because that's how Apple designed it. The same is true with the new background item technology. If you don't want the user to see weird notifications, that Armin Briegel is installing software in your system because the tool was assigned with my developer certificate. You want to use app bundles, you want to sign and notarize things. Doing it with scripts and launch daemons is really finicky. So signing and notarization is really something we have to look into for tooling going forward. And it's much easier with app bundles. We also get to do notifications, and if you want to write system extensions, those are bundles by definition. There's a few great things that are out there. Bart Reardon has rewritten the Outset tool, which used to be Python 2, completely in Swift in a native rewrite, and he bundled it into an app. So now you can give the Outset app PPPC exemptions, and those will be passed down to your login items that you launch with Outset. And that's really great because that was really, really difficult to achieve with the old Python version. And now we get that. And that is signed and notarized by the MacAdmins open source project. So this project, kind of everything I talked about, is in this project. Bart Reardon also built Swift Dialog, which is a successor to Cocoa Dialog or Deb Notify and all of these tools. It allows me to invoke UI and kind of build UI from a shell script, because we all still build shell scripts all the time. And many people have adopted Swift Dialog and used its capabilities going forward. Graham Hughes, a Raise install, uses Swift Dialog for the UI. Dan Snelson has written a script called Set Up Your Mac, which works with Jamf Pro during the enrollment phase. And that has all the bells and whistles and racing stripes you can put on a UI. If you want any kind of information during the enrollment process, this script probably has a knob to do that. Travis Isok has written a small nagging tool, very effective, only does one thing and says if a user hasn't rebooted their machine in X days, it starts nagging them that you should maybe reboot. Because so many issues go away when you reboot every 2 or 3 weeks, not every 6 months. Travis Isok also wrote Baseline, which is a management system independent enrollment script, where you can bundle up all the scripts and packages, install them on the system together with this tool. Also uses Swift Dialog for the progress. So they all look a bit alike because they use Swift Dialog, but it's a very powerful tool. And then Installomator can integrate with Swift Dialog optionally and provide you progress for the download and installation if you have a management tool that is not able to do that. So that's pretty neat. So the community bento. I was really happy putting this one together. And again, there are so many projects out there and tools and that I didn't have time to mention today. So I really am sorry if that is not on there. And let's have a discussion afterwards in the Slack about what else I didn't mention. There's one more thing on here that I haven't talked about yet, and I'm really proud to present, as you can see. And that is Jamf Setup Manager. It's a tool we have built in my team at Jamf over the last few months. And it's also an enrollment UI like Set Up Your Mac, Dep Notify, and Baseline. But we wanted to look at that, and we took a step back and said, so what is the most annoying thing about the enrollment? And so if you have an automated enrollment, you go through all the steps, you end up in Setup Assistant or Jamf Connect. The user creates their account with a username and password, and then they're happy to use the machine, and they get to the desktop, and the first thing we do is we lock the desktop and say, you have to wait. We have configuration and installations to do. And we always have to install Microsoft Office, which takes a while. And it's really frustrating. The user has to sit there and wait. And we thought, can we take that and move it earlier? Can we do that before the user has to interact with the machine? Can we have a tech do that and then hand the machine to the user and they do the login and user creation and then they can work immediately? We call that the single touch workflow. I skipped over some animations here. But the point is the user gets to the desktop and can start working because everything is already installed. All the security tools are in place and configured before the user touches the machine. So this is what we built. We are at automated enrollment. This is the customized enrollment. Watch, Misha is our tech here. He is logging in with his account into customized enrollment. And normally with Jamf, this would assign the device to him in the Jamf database. I've sped this up. Jamf went through the automated enrollment, and our tool pops up. Our tool here is configured to ask the user who's sitting at the device for some information. Misha is entering my email address as the user for the device. And he's entering an asset tag. This is all configurable. You can turn off any user entry if you want a fully automated deployment, or you can configure what it asks for. We have a nice About This Mac, which gives me enough information to identify the Mac. Also gives me some information like download speed and what the Jamf ID is. The installation already started. As soon as this tool came up, the installation started in the background. So if the tech is taking a while to enter all the stuff, the installation is finishing in the background. When we get through, it goes into the normal setup process, either Setup Assistant or, in this case, Jamf Connect. And Jamf Connect picked up that the device is now assigned to me instead of Misha, and I'm the only one who can set up their account. And when I log in, I get to the desktop. and all the tools are there. This is one of the workflows we've identified that are possible with Jamf Setup Manager. We called it Jamf Setup Manager because every assistant needs a good manager. It's a native app. It comes as a package that you put into the pre-stage. You build a configuration profile with the things you want it to do. You don't have to edit scripts. You don't have to edit shell code. It works with Jamf Pro and Jamf School. We're kind of proud that we made it work with Jamf School because they have a completely different enrollment workflow. But we are currently in a private limited beta, but if you are interested, setupmanager@jamf.com, and we will see if we can get you in there. So that concludes my overview of what's going on. I think this is a really exciting time to be a MacAdmin. I've been doing this for more than 3 decades now, and never have I been so optimistic about Macs being used in enterprises, schools, and organizations. And I'm not the only one. We get headlines and surveys and analysis every day about how Apple devices, iOS, macOS, everything, are being adopted and are growing in enterprise companies. And from what I see in working with customers and getting feedback from people in the Slack and through my newsletter, I believe that's true. And it's really great. We're at a great opportunity. Apple is embracing this, maybe not as much as we want, but things are moving forward, and it's a great time. Where do you learn about new things when this happens? Well, I have my weekly newsletter. I've heard from many people that they really like that, so thank you for subscribing. People have been asking me about that domain name. Say, Scripting OS 10, it's not really contemporary anymore. Apple dropped that years ago. Did you notice? Yes, I did. So I have something that I've kept for today and that I'm going to announce. And I found a great domain out there that was available. And I checked with the MacAdmins Foundation, and they said, yeah, you can use that. That's fine. So the newsletter will be moving over the next few weeks, slowly, because I don't want to lose any subscribers or Google ranking, to macadmins.news. The name will change. I really like that domain. Everything else will pretty much stay the same. Scripting OS 10 will continue for my technical posts and all of that, but the newsletter will be on macadmins.news. Thank you very much. It's been a long week. It's been a great week. This is the link where you can find the links. Thank you, Patrick, for having me here, for having all of us here.
Thank you very much.